looks like we don't have any other questions. So now is the moment you've been waiting for this morning. If it is still morning, Bob, take it away.
Thank you. We like to have fun. I have to say, this talk on infrastructure and insurance is like, to me, the stuff we can do if we choose to do it. And infrastructure here in along the Florida coastline, we have to prioritize what we're going to do. The infrastructure for escape routes is so vital, given the nature of the storms that we're having. And we're really, even though we're identifying these roadways as being urgently needed to be raised, they're not being raised. Other things are being done. So one of the things I'd love to see is that our county, our city, all the communities around us, our keys, our barrier islands that we love so much, that we really prioritize public investment in getting those roads raised, because 1 foot of raise will allow hours more of evacuation. And in the sense that we have major hurricanes spinning up fast that could hit us with small warning, we need to have that level of investment and that level of concern so that we protect the public. If we don't protect life and property, then what the heck are we doing? So that is the number one thing, the number one role of government, and all of our communities should be concerned about protecting life and property. When I was a lead forecaster at NOAA, this was drilled into me every day. And I think we've sort of lost the way because there's so many things we'd like to have that we're not necessarily investing in what we must have. And escape routes from hurricane is not optional. It's a requirement, and it's about time we get on to doing it. So now we're going to finally get to the hurricane season forecast, and I forced you guys to listen to all of these fantastic speakers so we would all learn something today. And I thought, well, you know, I'm tempted to do this first. And then I thought, nah, we're doing this last. So thank you for staying. And where's Marshall? Is he in the room here, Marshall Gobity? Marshall, stand up. So talking about infrastructure, Marshall is another one of our climate champions. He's a new one for this year. And Hunter's Creek by Pearl Homes, where you've seen some of the videos. But Marshall is one of these people who hasn't waited for anybody else. He's doing it. And part of the reason we have the climate champions is to inspire others to follow, so that we realize we have our way of doing things, but we also have individuals who stand out and make a difference. And so Marshall, thank you so much. We're so happy to have you. All right, so here we go. Now, this is global mean sea level rise over the years. This is since 1993. This is how it is. This is not debatable. This is not a belief. This is a series of billions of measurements. This is what's happening, and it's happened here. Since 1993, we've had 4 to 5 inches of sea level rise right here. And that's why the houses that we showed pictures of earlier look like they do. Because 1 inch of sea level rise has a big impact when we have a continental shelf like we have here in Sarasota. So let's review what it takes for a major hurricane. Number 1, warm water. Number 2, low wind shear. Number 3, abundant mid-level atmospheric moisture. You may not have heard a lot about this, but this is a very important part, and sort of subheadings to that is that means that we can't have a lot of Sahara dust blowing into the Atlantic Ocean because that's really dry. And when that happens, it suppresses hurricanes. And when African easterly waves move across Africa into the Atlantic, we tend to have major Atlantic hurricanes. And there are patterns to all of this that are both natural, but they're all enhanced by a warming climate. So this is the picture right now of the Atlantic Ocean, Caribbean, and Gulf of Mexico temperatures. The area that you see in yellow is the demarcation 26 degrees centigrade. When the water is warmer than 26, it will support major hurricane development. You can see a vast area of the Atlantic formation area, which is this whole area, is in that hot zone. These are the warmest temperatures I've ever seen in my entire career, and this early in the season. And we've been talking about this as a community, as an atmospheric science community now for months. But you can see, even going into the Gulf of Mexico, you can see that little yellow area that's peeking out there. And that is where the loop current is. And that's where we have super hot water often in the summertime. So this is, let's face it, this picture was the last few days of March. Hurricane season is supposed to start on June 1st. So when I look at this, I say the first thing is, wow, we could have a hurricane anytime. We may not have one that hits Florida right now, but there's a lot of land down there and a lot of people down there that could get hit at any time. This is just an amazing chart. You go across the bottom, and that's January through December, and you go up, and that's the temperature of the sea over years and years and years of history. The orange line was the sea surface temperature around the world average in 2023, which is a world's record. And look at what it is this year. It's already well above what it was last year. I mean, the water is hot. We don't have warm water. We have hot water. We had 100-degree temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico last summer for the first time ever, causing coral bleaching and ruining of the coral reefs, which also help protect our shorelines. So the next thing is wind shear. What is wind shear? Wind shear is the increase with height of wind speed. It can either be directional wind shear or just the speed goes up in the atmosphere. When we have no wind shear, the speed is the same at all levels. Hurricanes love that. Why? Because they can stack up vertically like this, but when there's wind shear, they lean over. And when they lean over, then they're not as efficient as engines for intensification. When they're vertical, energy is conserved in a way, and angular momentum is conserved in a way where they can spin up fast. So that's why we care about wind shear. That's why when we are in a low wind shear environment, my antennas go up. So the next thing is whether we're in an El Nino or a La Nina. And this is a chart of where we are right now. On the left-hand side, that dot up by 2 degrees there on the left-hand side is where we have been in the recent last few months. And you see that it's pointed down. The El Nino, which was a very strong one last winter, is now rapidly dying out. And we have about 25 models that predict the future of El Nino and La Nina, and all of them are forecasting a rapid diminish of El Nino and a rapid replacement by La Nina. And you see that little arrow down there. La Nina zone, by June, almost all the models are forecasting La Nina. June is normally the start of hurricane season. So hurricane season this year and La Nina seem to be perfectly timed, which is not a happy thing. So I want to show you what the difference is. During La Ninas, we usually have 50 to 60% more tropical storms, about 80% more hurricanes, and 100% more super hurricanes. Think about that. And this is from 1996 to 2023, where we've seen rapid climate warming. So La Nina years are really becoming very serious years for us. And to take a look at what is La Nina? Well, La Nina and El Nino are a couplet. They're called the ENSO, ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation is what it stands for. Part of that oscillation is La Nina, and the other part is El Nino. So during a La Nina, you can see what happens. There's upward motion in the Atlantic and downward motion. There's downward motion in the Pacific and upward motion in the Atlantic. And that little red arrow shows where it usually happens over the central Atlantic. And so when we have that, that just enhances hurricane formation because rising air is what we need to create a hurricane. And rising air is what creates thunderstorms and rain and all of that kind of thing too. So in the case of La Nina, this is sort of what happens, the preferred area where we see the low vertical wind shear over the Pacific, where it was really high last year, and low vertical wind shear over the Atlantic, where we had high wind shear last year. And that is what we need for the perfect conditions for hurricanes. So we have a climate models. This is the United States NOAA climate forecast system. This is a series of models that runs 12 of them. At the same time, it takes all of the data that we have every day and it crunches through what we're likely to see. And this is April. The green areas are areas of intense moisture and the yellow areas are dry. So I'm kind of excited we're going to have a nice spring because we're being dry air. That's April. So April showers don't look all that prevalent this year. But this is May, and all of a sudden you see what's happening down in the Caribbean. And in May, we have the hint that something could form in the South Caribbean and head up toward Florida. This is where we usually get our early season storms in the Caribbean, and they come between Cuba, the western coast of Cuba, into the Gulf of Mexico. And sometimes we get weak tropical storms in the Gulf. But with the much higher sea surface temperatures, even in May, we may see hurricanes forming this year. And then in June, you can see this a vast swath of moisture across from Africa all the way into the Caribbean. And this could be the storm track coming up in June. So if we have a storm track like this in June, this would be about 2 months earlier than we're used to seeing that kind of a storm track. And then July looks like it could be a really big month for hurricanes coming off of Africa, and there's a hint of maybe some storms going up the East Coast. And it doesn't look better in July and August. And then this is September. you know, a very strong hint we're going to have a lot of hurricanes traversing the Atlantic into the Gulf, a busy year in the Gulf of Mexico, which I showed you earlier would be what you expect during a La Nina. And then sort of over Florida, in our month of October, where we again shift climatologically toward Caribbean storms. So it just looks like a lot of moisture, which is a very important predictor of the number of storms. And finally, you see some dry air next fall. And you know, La Nina winters in Florida are great. We had an El Nino winter this year. We had 2 million fewer visitors to Florida this winter because it rained. Think about that. People are complaining, well, how come they didn't come? Is it the real estate? Is it this? Is it that? No, we had a La Nina winter, so why would you spend all that money to come to if you can't go to the beach? But next winter, I'm predicting a record tourist season. Okay, so this is things, if you know what's going on, you can make crazy predictions like this, and I hope I'm right. And so next fall looks really great as we go in. It's dry and warm in Florida, so we could have a really nice winter if we can get to that point without any major disruptions. So the other thing, the fly in the ointment is one of them is African dust. And this isn't a current picture, but if it was, it would be valid because this is sort of what it looks like right now. Big clouds of dust from the Sahara Desert are blowing into the Atlantic, and that's dry air, and it inhibits African easterly waves and hurricanes. And then you can see how it actually comes across, and sometimes we actually get it here in Florida. Last year, in an El Nino year, we had about 8 weeks of African dust, and it really knocked the heck out of hurricanes during that time. But around that time was really, really active. When the dust went, boy, we had an explosion in hurricanes. So if we have weak easterly waves, which I think we're going to this year, it's going to shift the hurricane formation area further east. And these are the waves that come all the way across Africa. When they get into the Atlantic, they form these major hurricanes like Irma. But when they don't, we get Idas and Idalias. And that's more like what I'm expecting this year. So this is the first group of hurricane names. And I think we're going to use all of those up. And so here's the forecast. 24 named storms, 12 hurricanes, 6 super hurricanes. That's a lot. So our chances here in the Gulf of Mexico and in Southwest Florida and Florida in general is about double what it was last year. Last year was 21, 7, and 3, and 7 and 3 is what we predicted. So I'm not saying that that will be that fortunate this year to hit it right on the head, but I'd be surprised if we were off a lot. And other people who are really good at predicting hurricanes are coming out with some big numbers for this year. Average is 14, 7, and 3. So this is a year we have to pay really close attention starting right now. And I'm hoping that I'm wrong this year. I really do. I don't know if I can write that many hurricane articles. But the Sarasota Magazine is like lined up to put these out as soon as they can. And of course, our website has daily updates. And anyone who is a member of the CAC gets a hurricane update right into their mailbox every morning when the hurricane threatens. So that's a little bonus. if we run through the first set of names, these are the second set of names. So these are the preliminary names, but they've already been chosen in case we go into hyperdrive over this hurricane season. The record hurricane season in history was 2020, when we had 30 named storms, and we ran through both alphabets that year. I'm predicting slightly less than that, but I am saying that the risk this year is to the upside. So remember these thoughts. Irma was 50 miles further west than it was. It would have been a wipeout here. If Ian was 50 miles further north, it would have been a wipeout. A Category 2 storm would put 6 to 9 feet of water across the Keys. This is the hurricane surge model prediction for a Category 2 storm, and the red is 6 to 9 feet of water. And that's all up and down the Keys. This is why it's so important that when a hurricane is coming in the age of super hurricanes moving more slowly than normal and rapidly intensifying on a sea level that has already risen 9 inches, that we don't procrastinate. If anything, if I were living on a barrier island, I would know what hotel I was going to, or what family member I was going to, what parking garage my car was going into, that I wouldn't wait to be told I have to leave. I would go and I'd have a staycation somewhere about 10 miles from the coast. This is a blow up of a Category 2 inundation. The red area is 9 feet. I mean, that's a lot of water, folks. And Rick was showing you what that looks like earlier. So we're in a very vulnerable area. One of the most vulnerable coastlines in the world is right here, because we have such a shallow continental shelf. And even an inch goes inland a lot further than it does on the East Coast. So this is what makes our insurance issue so acute on the west coast of Florida. So know your elevation. This is what we've been saying. If you live at 5 feet above sea level and we're expecting a 15-foot storm surge, you're going to drown if you stay in your house. 8 plus 5 is 13. Do the math, but know what your elevation is, because that'll tell you when you have to leave. If you're at 5 feet above sea level, go on a staycation and protect yourself. So this is what it looked like at Fort Myers Beach 24 hours before the storm struck. A meteorologist put a camera on a 12-foot pole because he thought it was coming in here. Yet 40 people drowned in this. They knew it was coming, but they didn't think it was going to impact them. A change in 50 miles to that storm would have put that storm surge right here on our barrier islands right here. If this doesn't shake you up, I don't know what else I can tell you. And I'm not saying this because I want you to be afraid. I want you to see it because I want you to be confident in making your decisions to protect yourselves, to protect your family, and to get our communities moving on climate adaptation. Because if we don't, these are the kinds of things we'll be seeing more and more often in neighborhoods near you. Thank you very much.
I don't know how much more I can take. I'm blown away. Jeez. I know there's a number of questions that you've got all teed up, but I just wanted to ask Bob, the first one is predicted. Bob, do you think this year could be the worst in modern history for hurricane risks here in Florida and in the United States in general?
Well, we're certainly in that window. We can't predict where a hurricane is going to hit right now. We can just give you the sense that the risk is higher now than it has been. I don't think there's another year, if we take the average of all the hurricane predictions, which haven't yet been made, all of them, when we add them up, I would bet it's going to be a record year where the smartest hurricane people in the world are forecasting the most storms. So that doesn't mean that we will have a record year, but we certainly could have a record year. And we have the triple threat of more people in Florida that want to live on the beach and more hurricanes that become major storms and affect our area. So we've had 3 major hurricanes here, Ida, Irma, and Idalia in the last few years. And that's why we started out with the ayes have it. And now we've got to turn that around and say, okay, if this is what we're going to be facing, what can we really do in the short term? And some of the things that we can do now is have a plan, make sure that you know where you're going to go, where you're going to take your car. You should have all of that worked out in your mind right now. Make sure you have your insurance up to date. All your papers should be ready to go if you have to evacuate. Don't wait for somebody to tell you what you do. We have carbon in the atmosphere, but the best carbon is right up here. So let's use it.
So one of your forecast charts showed a really, really big area going over towards the Mexico-Texas border. And then with a little arrow coming up the west coast of Florida. Does that mean that most of it's going to go towards New Orleans and that area and the Texas, Corpus Christi and all that versus what's coming up the west coast?
Well, historically, when we have La Niñas, the Gulf Coast gets a lot of storms. Most of the years we've had, except last year, the 3 previous were all La Niña years. In the last 7 years, we had 8 major hurricanes strike the Gulf Coast of the United States. That's 3, 4, or 5 hurricanes. And all of them, except 1, was during a La Niña year. So
Another question?
Earlier on, you were talking about the eyes, and that usually happens around September and October for those major hurricanes. But now you're talking about it might start earlier. Do you think that those, really massive Category 5s will also start earlier, not around September, October?
usually August, September, and October are our major hurricane months, and I think we could have that earlier this year. Probably more major hurricanes, I would say, in July. It will start at least a month earlier for major hurricanes, I believe. That's the risk. An earlier and more intense and maybe even a longer hurricane season, although I'm pretty sure that it's going to dry out here in November and December. So even though there might be hurricanes hitting in the southern part of the area, in the Southern Caribbean, I think, it looks like we'll be transitioning to better conditions for us locally.
We have 3 more questions. What over there?
Chris has been laying in wait.
Laying in wait. I think I asked you this question before, and I think it values repeating. How do we combat complacency? The people who say that there's an ancient curse that prevents us, or our barrier islands prevent us, or there's some dead princess that cursed us one time and we'll never get a hurricane. I hear that every single hurricane season. And having covered hurricanes, the local news for years, you know, you constantly say to people, no, that's not the case. But how do we really start battling that complacency, especially if these hurricanes are going to continue to get worse and worse and more frequent?
Well, you know, Elizabeth and I have this big joke that we tell every year at the Climate Champions Awards about the Indian princess, and it's becoming a series that people are looking forward to. What's the next one? But, you know, the folklore is that, you know, the princess was around 1530, and her remains are buried here somewhere, and that she's, you know, going like this to hurricanes and what have you. So there are other parts of the coast south of us that get hit more often than we do, and that's a climatic fact. But the fact is, in the time of climate change, Chris, there's been a tendency for these hurricanes now to come in closer to the west coast of Florida because of the way the globe has reorganized in a hotter environment. And the hurricanes are now coming up closer to the west coast of Florida, which is why we've had 3 major ones in the last few years. So, I mean, this is the problem with inertia, right? And people would like to believe that the princess is protecting us, and I would like that too. So, but, you know, there's no scientific basis to it. You know, I think luck, we've been, I would say, fortunate, if not lucky, but we've had so many storms hitting right around us that eventually it, you know, it will be our turn, and we just need to be prepared. It's a higher risk environment now than ever we've had here. I don't mean just this year, I mean just the trend is really not great. So preparation, and a priori preparation, is really going to pay off big time for our community. It doesn't mean that we have to disappear from this community, but it means that we have to manage this risk in a way that we didn't have to do in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s when there were a lot fewer people living here. Longboat Key was hit directly by a Category 3 storm in 1960, but nobody lived there. So people say, well, we've never been hit. Well, we have been hit, but it didn't do anything because there was nobody there. But there is now. Tens of thousands of people are there now. And it was hundreds, a few thousand back then.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, can you, well, first of all, thank you. I feel like I've had the poop scared out of me, but thank you.
Good, that's one way to
I never
put it.
thought I would thank anybody for that, but thank you. Could you, artificial intelligence, does that have any prospect of helping forecast? It doesn't sound like forecasting's the issue here, but can you comment on artificial intelligence and whether that bears on this in any way? Thank you.
So, you know, first of all, I'm for real intelligence. Okay. I'd vote for real intelligence first. But artificial intelligence is a tool, and it's going to get better and better. And it's depending on the data sets we have to train it on and the sophistication of the model itself. So I do think that we'll be able to take more things into account and quicker and better with artificial intelligence. And we're already testing models that don't use physics, but use artificial intelligence. And so far, there's some, I don't know, it looks very interesting. I mean, we don't know how it's going to go. But I really think there is a art and science in hurricane forecasting. You know, you get used to seeing certain patterns. Your mind works a certain way when it sees something. So, oh man, I saw that when Hurricane Ian hit. And these are the things that human beings do that computers, I don't think, will do, at least for another 50 years. So I do think the art and the science of it is what makes it so interesting. There is a human element that matters, in my opinion. And, you know, I mean, my career, I don't know why, but I've always been able to see like major weather events before other people. I don't know why, but it's a fact. I've won NOAA Special Achievement Awards for several of them. And people say, well, you're just lucky. And I said, well, maybe. And that could be, and I hope I'm wrong this time, but I think there is something about humans and machines where there's an optimum line and that line is shifting. So I think artificial intelligence will be a good thing in the future. If we manage it right, it's like any technology, it's ubiquitous technology, and it's the intention of people that makes it good or bad.
Well, there's one more question.
Okay, thank you, Bob, for that presentation. And CAC, this has been an incredible event. And, I'm the photographer that did the book, and I'm not talking now to promote that, but there are some books out there. I just, having seen a lot of storm damage, which is all up and down the coast, some areas, for example, the Outer Banks of North Carolina, they're just like a poster child for disasters, one after another. And Florida's not that bad, but I mean, we're bad. And I have to say, I really shouldn't say this at the end of an event like this, but I'm pissed off. I'm pissed off at overdevelopment and people who have been taken advantage of by developers and by builders that don't build to a really high standard. And I think one of the things we could really do, this is just my opinion, I'm not an expert, is really be much more aggressive with building codes and make sure that any new buildings are built to a much higher standard, and also try to get people to retreat from the barrier islands, which are really just like big sand dunes that have, they're meant to shift back and forth over the geological time. And once you plant thousands of houses on them, you're setting up a problem. So I know a lot of you folks probably live on a barrier island. It's beautiful, and I love Florida, and I respect that, but you really have to think about where you're living. And as Bob always says, what's the elevation? But beyond that, try to protect yourself. Try to retreat from the shoreline if you can manage it. So that's just my opinion.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. And just a reminder to us all, the importance of saving open spaces to absorb all the water and also to protect our coastal ecology through mangroves, and that will always protect us too. Yes, question? Yes? Please do.
So, John, great point. I was working a little bit with the community in Tybee Island in Georgia, and they were looking at the potential purchase of an insurance policy. It was more like a derivative, like this parametric stuff that I've discussed before. Basically, if they were hit by a hurricane, let's say category 4 or higher, they would get a few $1 million, right? But what impressed me was what they wanted to do with this money. What they were planning, you cannot force people to retreat, right? We all like our houses, we all like where we live, but they were thinking, if there's a hurricane, some people will be distressed to the point that they want to sell their properties at a time where no one would want to buy them. Let's get some money so that we can buy them for them, so that the town can buy them and repurpose those areas as parks or new nature-based solutions. And I thought that was very visionary. Forcing people to do things doesn't work. But if you are helping people who are in distress at a moment where they need it, you can then use the time to have a positive action for the future, right? We're going to describe that thinking process in a little article, but I think that thinking is the way to go. Let's prepare. If we cannot do anything better, at least let's prepare for when we get hit, that we can then do something better for next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Guillermo. Yeah. Well, with no other questions from the audience, we'll conclude today's program and thank all the presenters today, and especially Chancellor Holbrook for hosting us today at this conference center at USF. And just to remind everybody about the 4th annual climate conference will take place here. And its topic will be climate and human health. And that'll take place on November 14 and 15 later this year. And hopefully in the new building.
Hopefully, we're so hoping because we be able to seat 300 there. And this is going to be a major event. We hope you'll all come. And I really want to thank our USF partners, Greg Smogart, Emily, Kelly Bush, Kim McDonald, Cole, who is hiding over there and making sure everything was perfect today, Tressa, Mark, Ongard. I mean, it takes a team to win, and we've got one. And Karen, would you like to say anything to end it? We thank you so much for this.
Very briefly, let me just say thank you to everybody for being here. Most importantly, thank you to Elizabeth. You did a phenomenal job. It was wonderful having you here doing that. Thank you. And of course, thank you, Bob, and thank you to all the speakers. I want to say, first of all, I have to confess I live on Longboat Key. So having listened to this, I'm a little shaky, but we know our elevation and we will take off. But I think this was so informative and so instructive, not just to frighten people, but to give people information. And that's really what counts. And that is so important. This was, I think, very impactful and very important for everybody here. And the one thing I like, Tom, was a word that you used in your presentations, inclusiveness. I really liked the sense of inclusiveness in the program today because it wasn't just about the storm, but it was about the storm and it's about the people who were impacted. It's about all kinds of different things. And if you think about how many transportation, you think about how many things, infrastructure, all the things that fit into a storm that to think about, and all the people to think about, and all of the resources that we have to think about, which we heard a lot about resources today, financial as well. So I think this was a very inclusive program, Bob, and I congratulate you for putting it together and for everybody for being here and thinking about these things. And I so have appreciated all of the conferences that you have done and really look forward to the next one and hope that you do fill that auditorium with 300 people who will learn, who will come away thinking a little bit more deeply about these very serious problems that are affecting our world, not just our nation and our state. So thanks to everybody for being here, but thank you especially to you guys.
And just for our speakers, thank you to our speakers. And could everyone on the program just get in front of the stage so we can get a group picture? That would be great.